They said the British monarchy was built to endure anything: scandal, tragedy, even betrayal. But what happens when the betrayal comes from inside the royal bloodline itself? When the son of a king becomes his greatest source of public humiliation, private pain, and political chaos? The answer came in the form of a thunderous decision that rippled from behind the palace gates and shook the entire world. King Charles has finally had enough. No more warnings. No more reconciliations. No more silence. In a decision that has stunned even the most seasoned royal commentators, King Charles has officially cut off all contact with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. This isn't just a family feud boiling over, it's a full-scale royal shutdown. The king's final move? A historic and unprecedented ban. Prince Harry and Meghan Markle are permanently banned from all royal events, coronations, funerals, weddings, jubilees, state visits, public appearances, charity functions, everything. The message from Buckingham Palace could not be clearer. The era of olive branches is over. The age of quiet tolerance has ended. And the final curtain has now dropped on what was once known as Megxit. But how did it get this far? What led King Charles, a man who spent decades walking in the shadow of public scandal, to take the nuclear option against his own son? The answer, as we'll explore in this video, isn't found in one single moment. It's buried beneath years of tension, betrayal, backdoor schemes, media warfare, and what insiders now describe as the ultimate act of disloyalty. And it begins not with a press release or a royal decree, but with a phone call. It was early morning in Balmoral Castle, a place known for its serenity, its history, and its memories of Queen Elizabeth II. King Charles was pacing the long corridors, visibly agitated. The late Queen's portrait stared back from the walls, as if watching him wrestle with the burden of what he was about to do. On the other end of the palace line, his most senior advisor waited with final confirmation. The paperwork was ready. The public statement was drafted. The media outlets were standing by under strict embargo. All that remained was the king's signature and his decision to finally sever the ties that had haunted his reign from the very start. But this wasn't a decision made lightly. It followed years of strained family dynamics that exploded into public spectacle. From the explosive Oprah interview to the publication of Harry's tell-all memoir, Spare, every move the Sussexes made seemed designed to deepen the wounds in the royal fabric. King Charles had tried to remain neutral, even generous, extending invitations, offering financial support, even allowing Harry to participate in key royal events. But each olive branch was met with another dagger. Private conversations leaked to the press. Royal secrets aired on global platforms. Personal grievances dressed as activism. To understand how it came to this final break, we have to rewind, not just months, but years. Behind palace walls, Charles had always hoped that time would heal the wounds. In the early days of Megxit, there were private meetings, carefully worded statements, and reassurances made to Queen Elizabeth herself that the family could weather the storm. But as the Sussexes doubled down on their independence, launching media deals, documentaries, and accusations, it became clear that this was no temporary rift. It was a fracture, deep, spreading, and impossible to ignore. Sources close to the royal household say the king wrestled with his options endlessly. He was torn between duty and love, between his role as monarch and his role as father. Those close to him say he hoped Harry would find clarity, that Meghan would recognize the damage being done, and that at some point the tide would turn. But instead, the headlines only worsened. Netflix specials, paparazzi photo ops, podcast episodes dissecting private palace dynamics. And most recently, what insiders are calling the final straw. A private conversation between Harry and a senior royal aide was secretly recorded and then mysteriously leaked to the press, sparking outrage across the family and threatening to derail a major state event. That leak was not just a breach of protocol. It was seen as a betrayal so profound, so calculated, that even those most sympathetic to the Sussexes turned away in disgust. What followed was a closed-door meeting between King Charles, Queen Camilla, Prince William, and the royal secretary. The atmosphere, insiders say, was one of grim resolve. There were no tears, no pleas, no lingering doubts. The time had come. The decision was unanimous. And now, here we are. A royal bombshell of epic proportions. For the first time in modern history, a reigning monarch has formally banned a member of his own immediate family from participating in royal life. The ramifications are staggering. Harry and Meghan are no longer welcome at any royal ceremony, not even the private ones. Their names have been quietly removed from official schedules. Invitations have been rescinded. security protocols rewritten. Even the royal family's online presence has been subtly altered to reflect the new reality. The Duke and Duchess of Sussex are no longer part of the inner circle. What makes this story so shocking isn't just the decision itself, it's what it means for the future. Because this isn't just a family squabble. This is the Crown's way of preserving itself, protecting the institution from what it now sees as internal sabotage. And while many may wonder whether the king is acting out of bitterness or pain, royal insiders say this move is not emotional, it's strategic. It's about control, legacy, power. And as we dive deeper into the story, you'll see just how calculated this campaign of exile has become. From icy phone calls to ignored emails, from silenced royal aides to rewritten wills, King Charles has been laying the groundwork for this separation for months. Quietly, relentlessly, and with a level of precision that suggests he's not just trying to send a message to Harry and Meghan, he's trying to erase them from royal history entirely. But is it too late? Have the Sussexes already done irreversible damage to the monarchy's public image? Or is this final act of banishment the very thing the Crown needs to survive the modern age of scandal and scrutiny? There are also whispers now of something even darker, that the rift between father and son goes beyond hurt feelings and media backlash. That deep inside the palace, there are documents, conversations, and sealed files that, if ever revealed, could burn the legacy of more than just Prince Harry. As this story unfolds, we'll peel back the layers of royal strategy, media manipulation, and family dynamics that led to this stunning moment. You'll hear what palace staff are saying behind closed doors, what Prince William reportedly screamed during a tense meeting, what Queen Camilla advised in private, and how this move could impact the next generation of royals, especially Prince George and Princess Charlotte, who are now being raised in a world where the idea of duty above all has taken on new meaning. And as for Harry and Meghan, their response, or lack of it, speaks volumes. There have been no official statements, no Instagram posts, no anonymous interviews, just silence. A deafening silence that says one of two things. Either they were caught completely off guard, or they knew this was coming all along. Either way, the message from Buckingham Palace is final. Megxit is no longer a headline. It's a memory, a ghost, a decision that has finally reached its endgame. King Charles has drawn the line. The gates are closed. The silence is official. And for Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, the message is clear. You are no longer welcome. It's easy to mistake King Charles for a patient man. After all, he waited longer than any royal heir in modern history to ascend to the throne. Through decades of scandal, heartbreak, and public scrutiny, he remained composed, dignified, and, to the public, seemingly detached from the chaos that has plagued the royal family. But those who know him personally have always whispered about another side of Charles, one rarely seen by the cameras. A side that seethes beneath his carefully curated image. A side that, when pushed too far, erupts not in loud tirades but in quiet, methodical retaliation. That side has now come to the surface. Behind the stoic gaze and regal posture, Charles had been boiling for years. It wasn't just the Meghan and Harry drama. It wasn't just the interviews, the accusations, or even the tell-all memoir. It was the slow, deliberate dismantling of everything he had tried to protect. His family, his reputation, and most importantly, the future of the monarchy itself. It began slowly, with subtle slights that the public dismissed as tabloid gossip. Harry and Meghan's decision to step back from royal duties might have appeared sudden in 2020, but palace insiders knew the tension had been building long before. There were the constant battles over protocol, Meghan's disdain for certain traditions, and Harry's growing resentment toward his brother, Prince William. Charles watched as his youngest son transformed from a cheeky, spirited soldier into a bitter, unpredictable force of disruption. What many don't realize is that Charles initially welcomed Meghan with open arms. Despite the press's early obsession with her past and her American background, Charles made an effort to make her feel like part of the family. He walked her down the aisle at her wedding. He defended her against the press. And he reportedly offered the couple a separate household and generous funding to support their vision of a modern royal role. But that wasn't enough. The first cracks appeared when Charles realized Harry and Meghan were keeping secrets. They were making media deals without informing the palace. They were hosting private meetings with production companies. They were, in Charles's eyes, weaponizing their royal titles while refusing to adhere to the responsibilities that came with them. Still, the king, then Prince of Wales, held back. He tried to act as the bridge between his sons. He encouraged William to be more forgiving, advised Harry to be more understanding. But nothing worked, and the strain only worsened when Queen Elizabeth's health began to decline. Charles felt the weight of the crown pressing against him, not just as a symbol of duty, but as a symbol of a family tearing itself apart. Then came the bombshell, the Oprah Winfrey interview. Charles sat in silence as the world watched his son and daughter-in-law accuse the royal family of racism, cruelty, and neglect. The interview wasn't just a public relations nightmare. It was a deeply personal betrayal. The moment Harry uttered the words, "My father stopped taking my calls," something shifted in Charles. It wasn't anger at being exposed. It was humiliation. Global audiences weren't just hearing about royal dysfunction. They were hearing it from the mouths of the people Charles loved most. And instead of protecting the institution, Harry had thrown it under the global microscope. In private, Charles was devastated. He wasn't one for shouting or throwing things. His rage came in quieter, more dangerous forms. Long silences, delayed replies, meetings canceled without explanation. Sources close to the royal household described this period as a cold freeze. Communication between Charles and Harry dropped to zero. Even William, who had long championed reconciliation, admitted in private that the damage might be beyond repair. Yet even after Oprah, Charles held back from taking the most drastic steps. He still hoped, foolishly perhaps, that Harry would eventually come to his senses, that the novelty of fame, the Hollywood glitz, and the thirst for attention would fade. That Harry, deep down, still remembered the meaning of being royal, not for status or privilege, but for legacy. But what came next shattered that hope entirely. When Harry announced his memoir, Spare, the palace braced for a storm. What no one anticipated was just how vicious the storm would be. The book was more than a memoir, it was a detonation. Page after page revealed secrets, insults, slights, and accusations aimed not only at Charles, but at the entire family. No one was spared. Not William, not Camilla, not even the late Queen. The book accused Charles of being cold, of failing Harry as a father, of using him for public image while ignoring his emotional needs. But the part that stung the most? Harry's portrayal of Camilla. For decades, Charles had fought to rehabilitate Camilla's image. From public enemy number one to queen consort, her transformation was nothing short of a miracle. And just as the public had begun to embrace her, Harry ripped the scab open. He painted her as manipulative, power-hungry, and willing to sacrifice him to boost her own position. For Charles, this wasn't just another family squabble, it was war. And it was personal. Behind palace walls, the mood turned grim. Advisors began discussing contingency plans. Royal events were reorganized to minimize contact with Harry and Meghan. William, increasingly the king's closest confidant, urged stronger action. "He won't stop," he allegedly told Charles. "And every time we stay silent, he takes more." Still, Charles waited. Not because he was weak, but because he believed in giving his son every possible chance to come home, to apologize, to end the madness. But the apology never came. Instead, it got worse. Harry and Meghan accepted awards for fighting racism within the monarchy. They released Netflix episodes filled with dramatic music, teary confessions, and pointed accusations. Meghan gave speeches about female empowerment while subtly implying the royal family had tried to silence her. Every public appearance was another cut, and every cut brought Charles closer to the edge. The final breaking point, according to insiders, came just weeks before a high-profile royal ceremony. Charles had been planning a historic celebration of his reign, a multi-day event with dignitaries, global leaders, and royal family members from across Europe. It was meant to be a unifying moment, a reminder that despite the chaos, the monarchy was alive and well. But then, on the eve of the announcement, a private conversation between Charles and a senior aide was mysteriously leaked to a foreign media outlet. The contents were damning, not because of what was said, but because of the context. The leak made it appear as though Charles was mocking Meghan behind closed doors. The public backlash was immediate. Social media erupted. Headlines screamed. And once again, Charles found himself on the defensive for something he hadn't done. The leak was traced back to a device connected to someone in the Sussex orbit. While no names were publicly revealed, the damage was done. Trust was shattered. And Charles, according to one insider, finally snapped. That night, he didn't rage. He didn't shout. He simply walked into his private study, reviewed a sealed folder prepared by his legal team, and quietly signed his name at the bottom of the page. The next morning, the royal ban became reality. The document Charles signed was simple in appearance, but profound in implication. It was drafted with legal precision and emotional finality. At its core, it outlined 3 key actions. First, the complete severance of royal contact with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. Second, the withdrawal of all ceremonial invitations, privileges, and appearances. And third, the quiet but deliberate reconfiguration of future royal event planning to exclude them completely. No explanations. No press conferences. Just silence and execution. For weeks afterward, palace staff were sworn to confidentiality. Event guest lists were altered behind closed doors. Private meetings were held without digital recordings. Harry and Meghan, thousands of miles away in Montecito, had no idea what was coming. Or if they did, they didn't expect the action to be so absolute. This wasn't a symbolic snub or temporary punishment. It was total exile. Those within the palace noticed a shift in Charles almost immediately. For months, he had carried himself with a weariness that aged him beyond his years. But after signing the document, something in him lightened. He stood straighter, spoke more decisively, began smiling more in public. It was as though a heavy burden had finally been lifted. And in a way it had. The emotional seesaw he had been riding since Harry's departure was over. There would be no more wondering if they would reconcile, no more worrying about what interview might drop next, no more dodging reporters' questions about his estranged son. He had drawn the line, and for the first time in years, that line gave him peace. Still, this was no cold-hearted maneuver. Behind the firm decision lay an undercurrent of sorrow that only those closest to Charles truly understood. His relationship with Harry had once been loving, even playful. They shared private jokes, long horseback rides, and a bond forged in the shared trauma of Diana's death. Charles may not have always known how to show affection, but he had tried in his own way. And despite public perceptions, he had made genuine efforts to support Harry's happiness, even when it conflicted with royal tradition. But support without boundaries had turned into chaos. Charles had tried to be both a father and a monarch, and in the process, he had failed at both in Harry's eyes. The constant leaks, the public embarrassment, and the ceaseless headlines forced him to choose one role over the other. And as the weight of the crown grew heavier, Charles finally understood that to protect the monarchy, he had to let go of the son who no longer wanted to be part of it. The impact of that decision echoed far beyond palace walls. Within royal circles, reactions were mixed. Some senior aides, especially those loyal to Queen Elizabeth's era, breathed a sigh of relief. They had long believed the Sussex drama was undermining the institution. Others, including a few longtime friends of Diana, expressed sorrow, fearing the complete banishment would only deepen Harry's resentment. But none dared question the king's decision. Not publicly. Not now. Privately, Prince William was said to be both supportive and relieved. His relationship with Harry had collapsed after the memoir's release. The two hadn't spoken directly in months. At times, William had pushed for decisive action even before Charles was ready. He believed the ongoing chaos was not just a distraction, it was a threat. A threat to the credibility of the monarchy, to his own future as king, and to the well-being of his young children, who were now growing up in a world where royal scandals trended on TikTok. Queen Camilla's reaction, however, was more complex. She had been the subject of Harry's sharpest criticism. In her view, Harry had tried to undo years of careful rehabilitation. Yet she also knew what it meant for Charles to make this decision. The pain it cost him. The silent mourning that came after. Sources close to her say she supported the move, but with sadness. There were nights, one aide recalled, when she found Charles staring out a window for hours, holding an old photo of Diana and the boys. He didn't say a word. Just stood there, motionless, as if waiting for something to make it all make sense. But nothing made sense anymore. The damage had been done, and the only path forward was one paved by boundaries. Outside the palace, the public reaction was swift. News outlets scrambled to confirm the reports. The announcement itself was intentionally vague, released through a single palace insider to a select group of journalists. It didn't name names. It didn't accuse. It simply stated that moving forward, royal event planning would focus solely on working members of the royal family, with all others considered non-essential. But the message was clear. Harry and Meghan were out. In Montecito, the silence from the Sussexes was deafening. No Instagram response. No statement from their publicist. Not even a cryptic quote from a close friend. Just nothing. It was the first time in years that a royal move had been made without an immediate Sussex counterplay. And that, more than anything, showed just how serious the situation had become. They weren't just being snubbed. They were being erased. For Charles, it was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming control. For too long, he had allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment. He had hoped that time, distance, and maturity would bring Harry back into the fold. But each time he extended an olive branch, it was met with a fresh round of accusations, press storms, and Hollywood appearances. And with each appearance, Charles watched public trust in the monarchy falter just a little more. The crown wasn't just a symbol. It was a shield, one Charles had sworn to protect. And he knew that if he didn't act now, that shield would soon crack under the pressure of unchecked scandal. So he acted. He made a choice that no father wants to make. He chose the crown over the child. The institution over the individual, history over heart. And now, the monarchy is moving forward, without the Duke and Duchess of Sussex. The day the first trailer for the Netflix documentary dropped, it wasn't just a media moment. It was a declaration of war. In the short preview, Harry and Meghan sat in curated lighting, their faces composed but emotional, their words sharp and pointed. The snippets teased accusations of bullying, silencing, racism, and royal coldness. Intercut with dramatic piano chords and slow-motion shots of flashing cameras, it painted a picture that was impossible to ignore. The couple had been victims, and the palace had been the perpetrator. What no one could see, what no one outside Buckingham Palace was ever supposed to know, was the fury that erupted inside royal walls when that trailer aired. King Charles was scheduled to meet with diplomats that morning, a quiet reception to build post-Brexit ties. But instead, his entire day was derailed by the documentary's release. Aides scrambled to prepare briefing notes. Legal teams reviewed the footage frame by frame. Camilla canceled a public appearance. William reportedly stormed into a private meeting room, white-knuckled and silent. It was the moment they had all been dreading. The royal family had weathered criticism before. Accusations of rigidity, elitism, even racism had shadowed the monarchy for generations. But this was different. This was intimate. This was Harry. This was the king's own son, tearing open private wounds for global entertainment. It wasn't just betrayal. It was monetized betrayal. In the documentary's first episode, Harry alleged that members of the royal household actively worked against him and Meghan, that they sold stories to the press, that they protected William while leaving him exposed. Meghan added that there were discussions, concerns, she said, about their son Archie's skin tone. And while the couple didn't name names, the implications were clear enough. The palace went into full crisis mode. Meetings extended long into the night. Public relations experts were brought in from outside. Charles, despite his public image as calm and composed, was described by one source as a man pushed to the brink. Not with screaming or ranting, but with a quiet storm of disbelief. How had it come to this? How had his youngest son turned their family pain into a commercial production? And how many more betrayals were still to come? Because this wasn't just about one documentary. It was part of a larger strategy, a coordinated campaign, some believed, to redefine Harry and Meghan not as royals, but as martyrs. Victims of an ancient system too cruel to evolve. And central to that strategy was Harry's memoir, Spare. Before its release, palace officials had hoped it might be a reflection, a personal journey, maybe even a bridge toward reconciliation. But as review copies leaked and embargoes were broken, the truth came pouring out like poison from a cracked bottle. Harry didn't just criticize the institution. He dissected it. He described physical altercations with William, accused him of name-calling Meghan, described Charles as emotionally distant and weak, recalled how Camilla allegedly played palace politics to improve her image. Even the Queen wasn't spared, portrayed at times as passive, outdated, out of touch. The memoir was a bomb, and Charles knew it. To the public, the royal family maintained their classic strategy: never complain, never explain. But inside the palace, there was rage. Advisors feared long-term damage. Senior officials worried about how the revelations would affect diplomacy, public support, and even the Commonwealth. This wasn't just a family feud anymore. It was a political liability. Worse yet, the palace had no leverage. Harry and Meghan had settled in the United States. They had signed deals with publishers, producers, and streaming giants. Their finances no longer depended on royal funding. Their security, branding, and PR were handled independently. They were fully detached, but they hadn't let go. In fact, they seemed more obsessed with royal life than ever, only now, they were telling the story on their terms. What infuriated Charles the most was that he had tried to give them space. After Megxit, he offered them a transitional year, gave them the benefit of the doubt, even tried to negotiate a part-time royal role for them, something unprecedented in modern history. But they rejected it. They wanted independence, yet kept using their titles, family ties, and palace secrets to build their image. There was also a personal humiliation that Charles struggled to express. For decades, he had endured public judgment. From his divorce with Diana to the Camilla affair, to his often cold public persona. He had waited years for the British public to warm up to him, to finally see him as more than just the man who would never be king. And just as that moment arrived, just as he took the throne after his mother's death, his son began tearing it all down. No father wants to read his own child's words accusing him of abandonment. No monarch wants his reign to begin with scandal. But Charles faced both at once. Friends say the memoir broke him in ways nothing else had. Not because he believed it would destroy the monarchy, but because it revealed that the son he had once cradled in his arms, the boy he had tried to protect from the media after Diana's death, now saw him as the enemy. Even Queen Camilla, long the subject of gossip and controversy, was visibly shaken. After decades of repairing her public image, she was being re-vilified overnight. Social media exploded with attacks. Hashtags accused her of manipulation, treachery, even of orchestrating media stories to sideline Meghan. There were calls to remove her as queen consort. And while Charles publicly supported her, privately he blamed Harry. You knew what they would say, he reportedly told a close aide. He knew what this would do to her. Behind every page of the memoir, every frame of the documentary, Charles saw intent. Not just to speak Harry's truth, but to damage theirs. And yet, Harry and Meghan were not done. Shortly after the memoir's release, the couple were spotted attending red carpet events, accepting awards, giving speeches about courage and justice. Their brand had never been stronger. They were building an empire on victimhood, and the royal family had become their villain. That was the final straw. At a private dinner with senior advisors, Charles made his intentions clear. The leaks, the interviews, the books, it all had to stop. But since Harry and Meghan would never willingly step back from the spotlight, the palace had to act first. They had to draw the line. And this time, the line wouldn't be in sand, it would be in stone. The strategy from the palace wasn't reactive. It was preemptive. Charles had been watching the landscape shift for months. He understood that public opinion was no longer shaped by official press releases or formal statements. It was shaped by clicks, by memes, by viral clips and emotional interviews. And in that arena, Harry and Meghan had become masters. So, he moved with calculation. There were no televised declarations or dramatic rebukes. Instead, Charles quietly instructed his communications office to begin restructuring all royal media materials. Future event planning removed the Sussexes' names. Family photo galleries on official websites were updated. Internal protocols were rewritten to reflect a changed hierarchy, one where Harry and Meghan simply no longer existed within the working royal family. And that, perhaps, was the most brutal part of all. Not the removal, not the banishment, but the erasure. Within weeks, private communications from the palace to royal partners and charity organizations were sent out. They were brief, sterile, and void of emotion. They simply stated that the Duke and Duchess of Sussex would not be participating in any royal engagements, either in the UK or abroad, for the foreseeable future. No explanation, no apology, just an absence confirmed in ink. Charles made one last move that drove the message home. At an upcoming state banquet that would bring together diplomats and Commonwealth leaders, the palace was expected to display a selection of royal portraits, as it often did. Previously, these portraits included formal photographs of all senior family members, including Harry and Meghan from their last official royal appearance. This time, their photo was missing. In its place was a portrait of Charles with William, Kate, and their children. A visual statement so subtle and yet so deafening. The future of the monarchy, it said, would carry on without them. The press picked up on the change instantly. Commentators debated what it meant. Some speculated that Charles might be offering one last warning. Others argued this was it, an irrevocable break. But inside the palace, the decision had already been made. There would be no clarification, no spin. The king wasn't playing the media game anymore. He was writing his own rules. For Harry and Meghan, the silence must have been unsettling. They had thrived on confrontation. When one headline hit, they released a podcast. When one controversy emerged, they granted another interview. But now, the palace wasn't responding. And in the world of royalty, silence can be more dangerous than words. The couple's media strategy seemed to falter for the first time. Meghan's team pitched new ideas, but several platforms passed. The Netflix deal came under quiet review. Spotify's leadership reportedly reconsidered long-term commitments. Major partners began asking questions, not about the couple's popularity, but about their relevance. Without the royal connection, who were they? Behind closed doors, this was exactly the effect Charles wanted. He understood something many underestimated. Harry and Meghan's power came not from their content, but from their proximity to the crown. Strip the proximity away, remove the illusion of connection, and their platform weakens. They become celebrities, yes, but not royals. And that difference matters in a world where heritage sells. This wasn't about spite. It was about containment. Charles didn't want to destroy Harry and Meghan. He wanted to protect the institution. He wanted to ensure that the monarchy outlived scandal, that it remained a symbol of unity, not tabloid fodder. And to do that, he had to stop the bleeding. William, too, played a role in this turning point. He had been silent for too long, burned by betrayal, haunted by his mother's memory, and deeply protective of his wife and children. William had grown cold toward Harry. At one point, according to palace insiders, he even refused to attend an event if Harry would be present. He supported Charles's decision not just out of duty, but out of necessity. For the future king, the monarchy had to be bigger than sibling rivalry. Behind the scenes, Queen Camilla became a stabilizing force. Once vilified, she now provided balance. She advised Charles to stay calm, to avoid retaliation, to maintain dignity. It was her suggestion to handle the erasure with precision, not rage. Not to humiliate Harry and Meghan in public, but to close the chapter quietly, definitively. And so the erasure continued. Mentions of Harry and Meghan were omitted from public speeches. Their names were moved down the line of succession updates. Royal event planners were instructed not to include them in ceremonial programs. When the coronation was discussed, there was no seat saved for the Duke of Sussex. All of this happened without a single public word from Charles. That was the brilliance and the cruelty of it. The king didn't need to say, "You are no longer welcome." He just needed to stop including them, stop responding, stop acknowledging. And eventually, the world would follow his lead. Harry, once called the People's Prince, began to fade from public imagination. Not entirely, not overnight, but slowly. The coverage shifted from royal outrage to celebrity lifestyle, from palace drama to brand confusion, from powerful to peripheral. And Meghan, once a fresh face of modern monarchy, now found herself navigating an identity crisis. She was no longer a royal, no longer a working duchess, just a woman with a platform, searching for the next chapter, without the storybook castle behind her. In many ways, that was the final betrayal. Not the memoir, not the interviews, but the realization that despite all their efforts to stand apart from the crown, they had built their empire upon it. And once Charles took it away, the foundation began to crack. What really sent shockwaves through the entertainment and public relations world wasn't the silence, but what came next. As palace doors quietly shut, Harry and Meghan attempted to crank the volume up on their own megaphone. In late autumn, teasers for their Netflix documentary began to roll out. Behind-the-scenes clips of Harry in a hoodie and Meghan wiping away tears from her makeup chair flooded social media. But instead of the fanfare they anticipated, the reception was different this time. Less celebratory, more cautious. Audiences who had once cheered for their independence now hesitated. People began to ask, were they offering healing or exploiting heartbreak? The emotional narratives, once compelling, started to feel curated. The behind-the-scenes rawness? Some felt it looked a little too produced. In the comments section, the tide was turning, and Charles wasn't even lifting a finger. Then came Harry's memoir. Titled Spare, it was an emotionally explosive tell-all. Some passages painted vivid, painful memories of his time in the royal family. He spoke of frostbitten body parts, intense sibling rivalry, and grief that hadn't healed. But the book wasn't just a catharsis, it was a fire starter. And once it hit shelves, it ignited everything. The palace had braced for impact, but they didn't issue rebuttals. That was the strategy now, no response. But inside the walls of Buckingham Palace in Kensington, the damage was clear. William was said to be livid. Courtiers privately called the memoir a betrayal draped in victimhood. The Queen Consort, Camilla, found herself portrayed in less than kind terms, adding another layer of private tension that never reached the press, at least not from the palace side. And yet again, Charles did not retaliate. His refusal to engage wasn't a sign of weakness, it was a warning. If Harry thought the book would prompt a dialogue, an apology, or even a public rebuttal, he was mistaken. Instead, what he got was airless silence. The kind of cold, calculated stillness that only royalty can manage. And that's what made it hurt most. Within a month of the book's release, new headlines surfaced. Not about the contents of the book, but about brand fallout. Reports began to emerge that certain projects were being reconsidered. Meghan's animated series with Netflix, Pearl, was quietly canceled. Spotify executives, who had once championed the couple's podcast deal, were allegedly re-evaluating their return on investment. Big names in publishing, once eager to hear the Duchess's voice, were suddenly less enthusiastic. What had started as a strategy of speaking their truth now felt like a strategy of overexposure. The world wasn't shocked anymore, it was fatigued. Inside their Montecito mansion, the mood reportedly shifted from celebratory to defensive. There were talks of pivoting, new projects, new causes, but behind those walls, the most uncomfortable truth had settled in. The platform they had built relied heavily on a crown they no longer wore. And without that tether, the brand began to drift. They were still powerful, still watched, still rich, but no longer untouchable. Harry's interviews continued to trickle out, but even the most sympathetic journalists began to note the repetition. The pain was real, yes, but the message felt stuck in the past. When Harry appeared on television to promote Spare, even he seemed weary. The nervous laughs, the defensive tone, the longing for acknowledgement from a family that wasn't responding. All of it revealed more than the book ever could. At one point, a journalist asked Harry whether he saw a path back to reconciliation. His answer was hopeful, but tinged with desperation. He wanted accountability, he said. He wanted to be heard. But the royal family's silence was ironclad. And then came a pivotal moment, an interview Meghan gave with a popular women's magazine. It was supposed to be soft, lifestyle-focused, about motherhood and wellness and her personal growth. But one sentence stole the headlines. When asked if forgiveness was possible with the royal family, Meghan responded with a pause, then said, "I've moved on. I hope they can too." The implication was loud. She was done. But the question lingered, was Harry? Behind the scenes, insiders claimed cracks were showing. Harry was reportedly torn. He missed his family, missed the familiarity, missed the structure. The life he left behind may have been suffocating, but the freedom he had now came with uncertainty. Meghan, on the other hand, had no such nostalgia. She was looking ahead. Branding, investments, wellness ventures. She had plans. But those plans no longer had Buckingham Palace as a backdrop. Charles, meanwhile, stayed the course. With quiet resolve, he doubled down on the slimmed-down monarchy. Fewer working royals. Tighter control over press access. A focus on legacy. And most notably, no place for his second son. The coronation loomed, and with it came the biggest question yet. Would Harry and Meghan attend? The invitations were sent, carefully worded, strategically crafted, and when it arrived at the Montecito estate, the debate reportedly began instantly. Meghan was hesitant. Harry, conflicted. Royal advisors had predicted this. In fact, according to reports, they were counting on it. They knew the couple's presence would reignite the media fire, but they also knew their absence would confirm the fracture. In the end, Harry decided to attend. Alone. He arrived late, was seated far from the core royal group, and left almost immediately after the ceremony. The camera caught him walking alone, exiting through a side gate. It was a photo that went viral, not because of what was said, but because of what wasn't. No hugs, no shared glances, no warmth. The image spoke volumes. The monarchy had moved on. And Harry, for all his efforts to redefine himself, was now a guest at an event that once would have been his birthright. Back in California, Meghan reportedly supported the decision to go, but didn't regret staying behind. In public, she smiled, appeared at charity events, and launched a new campaign tied to female empowerment. But the glow was different now, brighter in some ways, colder in others. Their supporters still defended them, of course. But even among the most loyal fans, there was a subtle shift. The fairy tale was losing its luster. The drama, its urgency. The couple, their mystery. And that is what Charles had been waiting for. This wasn't revenge. This was longevity. The king had not shouted, not slammed a door, not launched a counter-documentary. He had simply waited. With patience. With strategy. And most of all, with silence. The real final straw wasn't the Netflix special or the memoir or even the interviews. It was the moment the public stopped gasping. When people stopped expecting the family to respond. When the drama became background noise. In other words, the moment Harry and Meghan stopped being a royal story and became just another celebrity couple chasing relevance. It was brutal, but it was effective. And it left one lingering, painful truth in its wake. Harry and Meghan had chosen their path. But they had underestimated how cold the palace's path would become in return. The walls of Windsor Castle had stood for nearly 1,000 years, but in recent memory, they had never felt more fortified, more symbolic of division. Not just between nations or bloodlines, but between eras. The old monarchy was giving way to something new, something leaner and less sentimental. And the biggest casualty of that shift wasn't a rival, a rebel, or even a scandal. It was a prince. The queen had passed, and in her absence, the soft buffer of grandmotherly forgiveness had evaporated. What remained was a monarch who prioritized legacy over lineage and a family closing ranks. The castle's grand corridors echoed with ceremony and duty, but behind closed doors, the conversations were pragmatic, sometimes even ruthless. The question of what to do with Harry had gone from emotional to logistical. He was no longer a loose end that might be tied back into the fold. He was now a liability to be managed. Inside the firm, as those close to the crown often called the royal institution, protocols began to change again. Official birthday tributes posted on social media had once included personal messages, often with affectionate photographs of Harry and Meghan. Now, those posts were either omitted entirely or replaced with generic statements. A quiet line had been drawn. No drama. Just distance. The royal aides who once coordinated Harry's schedules now worked closely with William. The staff that used to support the Sussexes' initiatives had long since been reassigned. There were no farewell parties, no official goodbyes. The transition was sterile, corporate even, like offboarding an executive who'd gone rogue. William, meanwhile, had stepped fully into the role that once loomed uncomfortably on the horizon. He was now the heir apparent not just in title, but in responsibility. With the Queen gone and Charles focused on modernization, William had become the bridge between tradition and transformation. And his stance on his brother had hardened into something immovable. It wasn't just betrayal that distanced them. It was exhaustion. William had tried, at least in the beginning. After Harry and Meghan's initial departure, there were calls, messages, even attempts at reconciliation. But each effort seemed to be met with new interviews, new accusations, and new headlines. And eventually, William stopped trying. The line had been crossed too many times. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, remained publicly graceful but privately resolute. She had endured years of comparisons, accusations, and public dissection. Some close to the palace say the final straw for her came not from a tabloid, but from Meghan's comment in an interview that suggested Catherine had made her cry and not the other way around, as was widely reported. It wasn't the event itself, but the fact that something so private had been weaponized. After that, the door quietly closed, and it hadn't reopened since. There was also the issue of trust. In royal circles, discretion is currency. Loyalty is survival. And once trust is broken, it is rarely restored. After the Oprah interview, many inside the palace feared that even casual conversations with the Sussexes could end up public fodder. There were whispers of staff being reluctant to speak freely around them during family events, afraid their words might later be quoted or misrepresented. The rift wasn't just personal. It was institutional. And no one embodied that more than Queen Camilla. Camilla had spent decades trying to rehabilitate her public image. From mistress to consort to queen, hers was a transformation that demanded patience, humility, and silence. So when Harry's memoir referred to her as dangerous, accusing her of leaking stories to improve her image, it cut deep. not just because it was personal, but because it threatened the fragile balance she had worked so long to achieve. Yet even then, Camilla did not respond publicly. Instead, she doubled down on her role, supporting Charles, streamlining her duties, and strengthening her influence quietly, effectively. But behind the scenes, her position on Harry was clear. She believed the door should remain shut. Charles, ever the diplomat, occasionally expressed sorrow over the family breakdown. In private conversations with trusted friends, he lamented the loss of closeness with his youngest son. But even he had his limits. When the memoir landed and the media frenzy peaked, Charles reportedly told advisors, "We can't keep bleeding for the same wound." That phrase, so simple, yet so final, became the unofficial mantra for how the palace would proceed. No more olive branches. No more chasing reconciliation. It was time to protect the crown, not repair the cracks. One major sign of this new era came with a seemingly innocuous event, the annual Royal Christmas Walk in Sandringham. It was a tradition beloved by the public and covered wall-to-wall by the press. In previous years, even amid tension, Harry and Meghan had been part of it. Their presence always drew attention, photographs, applause. But this year, they were not invited. Their names weren't on the guest list. No travel arrangements were made. And for the first time since their departure, the palace didn't even pretend to extend an invitation. It was a deliberate choice. One that made headlines, but more importantly, one that sent a message: the royal family had moved on. In Montecito, the message was received loud and clear. Sources close to the Sussexes say that while Harry still harbored hope for a future reconciliation, Meghan had grown more resolute. She believed the institution was inherently flawed, that the damage was irreversible. Her focus shifted to carving out a post-royal identity through media ventures, philanthropic work, and lifestyle branding. Their Archwell Foundation continued to operate, but even it faced challenges. Staff turnover was high. Projects stalled. Media interest waned. Some donors pulled back, worried about public perception. The foundation's annual reports became more vague, less enthusiastic. Meanwhile, in Britain, William and Catherine were being positioned more and more as the new face of the monarchy. Their appearances were sharp, strategic, and well-received. Public support soared. And through it all, they never once mentioned Harry or Meghan, not even when asked. The media, for its part, had begun to follow suit. Coverage of the Sussexes became less frequent. Articles once breathless with every move they made were now more subdued. The couple's presence in tabloids persisted, but the tone had shifted from fascination to fatigue. And yet, one final blow was still to come. In the spring, the palace announced plans to convert Frogmore Cottage, Harry and Meghan's former UK residence, into staff housing for royal employees. The lease was officially terminated. The couple was given a deadline to remove any remaining belongings. This wasn't just an eviction. It was an eviction from history, a symbolic removal of their last physical tie to royal life in the UK. With Frogmore gone, so too was any lingering illusion that a return might still be possible. Harry was said to be heartbroken. The cottage had been a gift from the Queen. It was where they brought Archie home from the hospital, where they had planted their first garden, where they had believed, even briefly, that they could have both independence and inclusion. But the monarchy had made its choice. And now, so had Harry and Meghan. They remained in the U.S., raising their children, pursuing new ventures, and occasionally speaking out. But the chapter with the royal family was no longer an active wound. It was a scar visible, permanent, but no longer bleeding. The Windsor Wall had been built, not of stone or brick, but of silence, strategy, and time. And by the time the world noticed it was complete, the family on the other side had already learned to live without the ones they left behind. As the House of Windsor shifted into a new gear, so too did the machinery that surrounded it. The press, once ravenous for royal stories of all kinds, had begun to recalibrate its lenses. Gone were the days when a grainy photo of Harry and Meghan leaving a restaurant could lead headlines for weeks. Now, news cycles moved faster. Attention spans were shorter. And public perception, long a pendulum swinging between admiration and condemnation, had settled into something far less predictable. The media's role in shaping the royal narrative had always been double-edged. For decades, tabloids and broadsheets thrived on proximity to the palace. Leaks were lifelines. Rumors were currency. But with the Sussexes' exit and subsequent revelations, a new era had dawned, one where the press was no longer just a chronicler of royal life but a participant in the drama. At the heart of this shift was an uncomfortable truth. the public had become both more skeptical and more selective. Scandals no longer landed with the same impact. The audience, flooded with content from all corners of the internet, demanded more than headlines. They wanted authenticity. And authenticity, as it turned out, was a rare commodity. Harry and Meghan had tried to control their narrative, first through the Oprah interview, then through a 6-part Netflix documentary, and later through Harry's memoir. Each attempt was a bid to reclaim their image, to offer their side of the story, to wrestle the microphone from the media that had, in their view, misrepresented them for so long. But the results were mixed. The initial reaction to the Oprah interview was explosive. The couple's revelations about racism, mental health struggles, and institutional neglect sent shockwaves across the globe. Supporters rallied to their defense. Critics called it a betrayal. Buckingham Palace issued a rare public statement, noting that recollections may vary, a phrase that would echo for months in headlines and comment sections alike. Then came the Netflix series, beautifully shot, intimately narrated, but again, polarizing. Some viewers felt it humanized the couple. Others accused them of narcissism. The series was dissected not just for its content but for what it chose to leave out. The glossy production contrasted uncomfortably with the raw vulnerability they claimed to offer. Harry's memoir followed. A deeply personal account, it peeled back layers of royal life with searing honesty and, at times, awkward candor. He wrote of frostbitten body parts, psychedelic drug use, and physical altercations with his brother. It was gripping, messy, and unfiltered. And yet, even this failed to cement a singular public opinion. Instead, the memoir became another mirror, reflecting whatever biases the reader brought to it. Back in Britain, the palace remained largely silent through it all. It was not just strategy. It was doctrine. The institution had long adhered to the mantra of never complain, never explain. And in this era of media saturation, that silence became its most powerful weapon. While the Sussexes spoke, the palace listened. While they explained, the royal family remained enigmatic. And in the silence, the public began to draw their own conclusions. This dynamic created a strange equilibrium. For every headline criticizing Harry and Meghan, there was one defending them. For every viral clip accusing the palace of coldness, there was another praising William and Catherine's composure. The narratives existed in parallel, rarely intersecting, and always tailored to the beliefs of the audience consuming them. Social media added another volatile layer. Platforms like Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok became battlegrounds for opinion. Hashtags trended. Fanbases clashed. Conspiracy theories flourished. Was Meghan really pregnant? Was Harry under some kind of spell? Were William and Catherine cold, or just bound by duty? Every photo, every public appearance, every facial expression was scrutinized, meme-ified, and weaponized. The couple's supporters dubbed themselves the Sussex Squad. Their loyalty was fierce, their posts relentless. They saw Harry and Meghan as victims of an outdated, racist institution, as brave truth-tellers, as champions of modern values in a monarchy clinging to the past. Their opponents, often equally vocal, accused the couple of hypocrisy, criticizing the media while courting it, claiming to want privacy while signing multi-million-dollar content deals. They called them opportunists, grifters, even traitors. And somewhere in the middle was a growing swath of the public who simply felt tired. Tired of the drama. Tired of the endless back and forth. Tired of choosing sides in a family feud that, at its core, seemed beyond resolution. This weariness began to show in the numbers. Ratings for the Sussexes' content declined. Polls showed a drop in favorability, particularly in the UK. Public appearances generated less buzz. The novelty had worn off, and the echo chamber they had helped create began to feel isolating rather than empowering. At the same time, William and Catherine's approval ratings soared. They weren't saying much, but what they did say was measured, purposeful. Their charity work continued with quiet consistency. Their family photos, released strategically through official channels, offered a glimpse of stability. They appeared modern but grounded, in control but not controlling. The contrast couldn't have been starker. And yet, beneath all the media noise, deeper questions persisted. What role should the press play in covering the royals? Were they public figures or private citizens? Was the monarchy obligated to be transparent, or was its very allure rooted in mystery? These questions took center stage in newsrooms, universities, and online forums alike. Scholars debated the ethics of media intrusion. Journalists defended their right to investigate. Former palace aides weighed in with insider perspectives. The public, inundated with narratives, struggled to determine which version of the truth to believe. Even within the press corps, tensions rose. Veteran royal correspondents complained of being iced out by the palace for reporting unfavorable truths. Others criticized Harry and Meghan for bypassing traditional media to release their stories through carefully crafted productions. Trust eroded on all sides. The British tabloids, once the primary antagonists in the Sussex saga, found themselves both emboldened and constrained. Lawsuits filed by the couple had led to some high-profile settlements. But the tabloids remained undeterred, adapting their tactics. Paparazzi photos were traded for insider leaks. Gossip columns were cloaked as opinion pieces. And then came the documentaries, not the Sussex's own, but the third-party exposés. From BBC specials to investigative pieces by international outlets, a new wave of content sought to deconstruct the royal narrative from all angles. Some focused on the historical roots of colonialism and its ties to the monarchy. Others examined the press's symbiotic yet parasitic relationship with the royal family. A few zoomed in specifically on the Sussexes, questioning their claims, motives, and impact. Each documentary added more fuel to the fire, more layers to the labyrinth. Audiences toggled between sympathy and suspicion, support and scorn. The line between fact and perception blurred further. And yet, through it all, the power of the crown endured. Despite the scandals, the shifting tides, the generational divides, the monarchy retained its mystique. It evolved, ever so subtly. It recalibrated, not through words but through structure. And at the heart of that recalibration was an unspoken agreement between the palace and the public. We will continue to watch, even if we no longer understand. For Harry and Meghan, the echo chamber became both a sanctuary and a prison. They had achieved freedom, but at a cost. Their every move was still judged. Their legacy still contested. And while they had the platform they once lacked, they now bore the responsibility of filling it with meaning. Back in the UK, royal engagements continued. Ribbons were cut. Diplomatic meetings held. State visits planned. The machinery of monarchy churned forward, undeterred by headlines or hashtags. And in quiet corners of newsroom meetings, editors asked themselves a familiar question with a new urgency. What do people really want to read about the royals anymore? Some publications pivoted to softer content, fashion features, charity spotlights, photo spreads. Others leaned into scandal, ever eager for the next feud, the next reveal. But across the board, one sentiment grew louder. The story was getting old. Unless something truly seismic happened, a resignation, a death, a revelation, coverage would slow. The royals were no longer the untouchable enigmas of old, nor the soap opera stars of recent years. They were human, fallible, complex. And the press, once their biggest booster and worst enemy, now struggled to know what role it wanted to play. And so, the echo chamber quieted. Not because the drama had ended, but because the audience had grown numb. The power of perception, once the crown jewel of media influence, was fading. What remained was something simpler, stranger, and perhaps more enduring. A fractured family, a divided nation, and a public learning to live with the idea that not every story has a hero. Inheritance within the royal family has always been more than the transfer of assets or titles. It is the passage of power, tradition, and identity. To be born into the monarchy is to step into a role before you can speak. Expectations are not just spoken, they are inherited. And with every generation, the question emerges, what do we keep, and what do we leave behind? Following the death of Queen Elizabeth II, these questions turned from philosophical to procedural. The transition of power from monarch to monarch was already steeped in ceremony, but beneath the public pageantry was a quieter, more consequential transition, the redistribution of influence, of trust, and of control. With King Charles III now officially seated, decisions about titles, estates, and trust funds became a priority, not just in terms of who received what, but what those choices signified. The royal family was undergoing an internal audit of sorts, aligning itself with the demands of a modern monarchy, a streamlined institution that could justify its existence to an increasingly skeptical public. And at the heart of that recalibration was the Sussex question. When Harry and Meghan stepped down from royal duties, the implications were far-reaching. At first, there was confusion. Could they still be called Duke and Duchess of Sussex? Would their children be granted titles? Could they keep Frogmore Cottage? Would they be cut off financially? And if so, from what? These weren't just tabloid talking points. They were legal, constitutional, and deeply emotional matters. Initially, a kind of middle ground was forged. They would retain their titles but not use them commercially. They would forego public funds but retain access to certain private trusts. Frogmore Cottage would remain theirs for occasional visits. It was a diplomatic answer to an undiplomatic dilemma. But as the relationship frayed further, interviews, memoirs, revelations, the palace moved from compromise to conclusion. One by one, privileges were quietly withdrawn. Security details revoked. Financial support trimmed. Access to certain estates restricted. And most notably, the question of their children's titles became a crucible for larger questions of legitimacy and inclusion. Traditionally, the grandchildren of the reigning monarch are entitled to be styled as prince and princess. When Charles ascended the throne, Archie and Lilibet, Harry and Meghan's children, technically qualified. But the palace remained silent. No announcement was made. No titles bestowed. And in that silence, speculation exploded. Some argued it was a deliberate snub. Others believed it was part of a broader reimagining of the monarchy, a vision that emphasized working royals and slimmed-down structures. But regardless of motive, the effect was clear. A line had been drawn between the heirs and the spare's offspring. Harry reportedly found this deeply painful. For all his criticism of the institution, he had hoped his children would be embraced by it, or at least afforded the same recognition as their cousins. Meghan, for her part, had long expressed skepticism about what inclusion even meant, but the omission of her children from formal recognition only reinforced her belief that the institution was incapable of change. In private, the conversation turned toward finances. While the sovereign grant and Duchy of Cornwall funds were off-limits to the Sussexes post-exit, certain trusts established by Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip remained in question. These trusts, often veiled in legal complexity and managed by a network of advisors, were designed to protect the long-term stability of the family. But they were also subject to interpretation. Harry had long been the beneficiary of such trusts, including one left to him by his mother, Princess Diana. But in recent months, palace insiders whispered that even these private financial pipelines were being reviewed, not necessarily to punish, but to preserve. There was concern that any association with Harry and Meghan's commercial endeavors could expose royal assets to reputational risk. One particularly sensitive matter involved Balmoral. The Scottish estate, beloved by the Queen and treasured by Charles, was rumored to be at the center of inheritance talks. While publicly owned areas were separate from royal finances, the private residences and lands held personal and symbolic value. Charles was reportedly intent on keeping Balmoral within the line of succession, specifically with William and his family. Any speculation that Harry might retain partial access or future claim was quashed. The same applied to Sandringham. And then there was Clarence House, Highgrove, and the Duchy's expansive properties across the UK, an empire within the monarchy, now being realigned for maximum stability. Harry, once destined to be part of this inheritance web, found himself increasingly untethered. And it wasn't just about land or money. It was about meaning. The stripping away of financial support and symbolic connections created a deeper void, a detachment not just from the institution, but from the narrative of belonging. What remained were lawsuits, trusts under scrutiny, and an emotional chasm that no amount of PR could bridge. Meanwhile, William stood firmly in the eye of this inheritance storm, tasked with safeguarding not just property, but public trust. His role had become one of stewardship, ensuring that what the monarchy represented, legacy, stability, continuity, was not diluted by scandal or sentiment. For Catherine, this transition was equally profound. She had gone from consort-in-waiting to cornerstone of the future monarchy. Her involvement in decisions around education reform, early childhood development, and health services was growing. And with it came influence. Behind closed doors, her opinions mattered more than ever. It was said that Catherine had advised caution in matters concerning the Sussexes, not out of malice, but from experience. She knew the cost of media scrutiny, the weight of public expectation. But she also believed that the monarchy's survival depended on structure, not emotion. So when the time came to reassign titles and trusts, she stood with William and Charles in favor of clarity. The message was simple: loyalty must be met with legacy. You cannot criticize the institution while expecting to benefit from it. And so, slowly, methodically, the royal family closed ranks. Trusts were restructured. Titles clarified. Properties reassigned. What once was shared was now secured. And in the eyes of the firm, this wasn't vindictive. It was necessary. But public perception is rarely so tidy. To some, these actions appeared petty, vindictive, proof that the monarchy could not tolerate dissent. To others, it was accountability, a long overdue correction of blurred boundaries. Either way, the royal brand was shifting, and the fault lines of family ran straight through its foundation. In California, the Sussexes continued their rebrand. Archwell's focus turned increasingly global, funding women's initiatives, mental health campaigns, and media projects. Meghan relaunched her lifestyle brand, ventured into children's literature, and flirted with returning to acting. Harry appeared at tech conferences, spoke on trauma, and partnered with wellness firms. But behind the scenes, financial pressures loomed. Their Spotify deal had quietly ended. Netflix projects were under review. The pressure to produce content that was both commercially viable and mission-driven grew intense. At the same time, rumors swirled of new legal challenges, libel cases, contractual disputes, questions around charity transparency. And with each headline, the distance between past inheritance and present reality widened. The Sussexes had claimed their independence, but at a cost that few anticipated. Gone were the palaces, the automatic reverence, the protective machinery of the crown. In its place was hustle, strategy, and reinvention. They were no longer royals in practice, only in name. And with that name came burdens as well as privileges. For the royal family, the inheritance of shadows was complete. Harry had been loved. He had been mourned. But now he was managed. His titles were historical. His trust funds compartmentalized. His access conditional. And as the monarchy looked ahead to coronations, jubilees, and national service, it did so with a blueprint that no longer included him. The future was William and Catherine. The line was drawn. And the legacy, however painful, was preserved.